I'm not sure we really understood the level of the problem here early on, and I'm not sure we really understand how embedded al-Qaeda has become. Lieutenant Colonel Tom Sipola, U.S. Battalion Commander in Mosul.
Welcome back to Inside Iraq. We are discussing Mosul and overall security in Iraq with Larry Korb, Raoul Mark-Gerecht, and Sami Ramadani. Sami, I noticed while Mark was talking about the positive contribution of American presence in Iraq, you were shaking your head. Go ahead.
I was, because this ignores the reality that many of the problems inside Iraq today are really caused by the presence of the US-led forces. And the outlook that it's all Sunni versus Shia and so forth is so simplistic as to be really quite ridiculous sometimes. Overwhelmingly, Iraqis want the troops out. And quoting one or two political leaders here and there will not change that fact. These political leaders might have their own sectarian agendas, but the bulk of the population is united around this question that Iraq must chart its own future, and it should do so without the presence of the occupation. There are forces within the United States itself which want the occupation to continue, and though the acts of violence in Iraq are heading in that direction, whereby there is created a rationale that the US forces are a force for stability and maybe they should prolong their presence in the country.
Let me give Mark a chance to answer. Go ahead, Mark.
Sure.
One, I think the Battle of Baghdad in 2006, 2007 should surely indicate that the Sunni-Shia issue is a real one. I mean, Mosul is a more complicated situation. The insurgency never ended there. You have the hardest core within the Sunni community, also with al-Qaeda, that are there, and it is a distinctly different situation. Forces? What the Southern movement for now is, for the most part, finished. We'll see whether it revives. I mean, Iraq's biggest issue, and this has to do with the awakening councils also, is that it's broke. It doesn't have enough money. It needs the price of oil to be higher. There is an enormous security apparatus which the United States has built up. It's got to be paid for. It's very expensive. People have gotten accustomed to working for the state. The state doesn't have enough money. So they have a serious problem coming down.
That begs the question, Mark, and that question is going to go to Larry Korb. The state does not have the money for the awakening councils, and yet it had money for hundreds of thousands of former militias. They were inducted into the security forces and the Iraqi army. Does that tell you something about the orientation of al-Maliki's government? Is he making a big blunder for not utilizing them? Because it's a question of time before they turn against him.
Well, I think basically, yes. I mean, Maliki was never happy with the awakening or the Sons of Iraq, and he has, even when he had money before the price of oil dropped, he was not basically living up to his part of the bargain to take them into the service. 1 October, they began to have to pay them. And I think the real danger for the U.S. is we don't want to get caught having the Iraqi government, the Maliki government, have us deal with their problems. In other words, have American forces go after the Sons of Iraq to settle Maliki's claims rather than dealing with groups like al-Qaeda. And that's where I think it's good for the United States to get out of what still is basically a civil war. I mean, yes, there's some al-Qaeda, but that's not the main cause of the violence.
Sami?
I think again, unfortunately, even Larry is ignoring Pentagon's own statistics, which show that about 1,500 operations against the US-led forces are being carried out in Iraq on monthly basis. So to suggest that these headline-grabbing type terrorist attacks are the only feature within Iraq, I think ignores the fact that there is quite a strong, if you like, nationalist or patriotic resistance movement in the country from Mosul down to Basra. You see, their presence is not only inducive to violence, but it's inducive also to dividing Iraqis along many different lines, whether whether sectarian, political, social even, to just attack the Iraqis as being dependent on the state is rather condescending as well. This is a very hard-working population which has been knocked sideways by the occupation.
Here is a dilemma, and let me run it by Mark, see if he can comment on it, and that is, it is almost a catch-22, Mark. For the time being, it is not even in the cards for the U.S. to pack and leave, and hence the question of the 35 to 50,000. How long this 50,000 is going to remain in Iraq, despite the fact that there's a drainage on U.S. economy and some sort of a focal point for attack against the U.S.?
I mean, I suspect the 50,000 will be there, which really, that number is not that terribly large, by the way, given what they do, will be there as long as the government of Iraq wants them to be there. And it's going to take an enormous amount of time, I think, for the Iraqi army to become logistically sound. It's still quite primitive. It's just going to take time. And you know, the number of troops required to maintain logistics, required to maintain training, required to maintain the international zone, required to maintain the airport, you add them all up and you get to 50,000 pretty quickly. But the American troop presence, you can go for a long time and not see American troops in Iraq now.
Larry Korb, you are a man of the world. You were Assistant Secretary of Defense during the Reagan administration. You must have heard all kinds of explanation. Here are two of them regarding the violence in Iraq. Some say it is all done by the Americans. The Americans, in order to stay, they instigate it and they help all kinds of groups in order to create this mayhem. Others, they say, it is not in the interest for the U.S. image to be seen that destroyed a country and yet cannot keep it.
Well, no, I don't think the U.S. is causing violence to stay, and I disagree with Mark. I think the Iraqis are going to insist that we get out completely by the end of 2011. That was the status of forces agreement. They refused to sign it unless we would agree to do that. And I agree with Sammy that we need to get out and we need to let Iraq solve their own problems. We've done what we can, and I think it's important for the United States to get out completely. But President Obama said he's going to get the combat troops out by the summer of 2010, leave a residual force, but it's all out by the end of 2011.
Sammy, this story is by far has not reached its end. There are many chapters still to be written. There is a major force waiting outside Iraq. Primarily, the old Iraqi army is almost intact in Syria and part of Jordan. It's only a question of time before they come back as the American head home.
Well, I mean, this is one scenario, Jassim, but really in terms of the internal contradictions within the Iraqi political scene, one element that will for sure come back alive, if you like, is that the internal Iraqi political dynamics will be the predominant feature, rather than the presence of a major superpower inside Iraqi society in the shape of the US-led occupation. Take that out of the equation, and the Iraqi politics will look completely different. Remember, we're talking about the Iraqi government and the Maliki government as though it's an independent force. Well, their own physical presence, whether it's Maliki or his ministers or his advisors, is dependent on the presence of the US forces inside the Green Zone. They are the captives of the Green Zone. That's why a lot of Iraqis call them the Green Zone regime. I await the day when the US forces completely leave Iraq and not just act behind the scene or leave their forces as advisors and trainers, yes, and what have you. Then we could have Iraqi politics coming to the fore.
Since you made a prediction, I'm going to ask Mark to go on a limb and make a prediction. Mark, look at Iraq, say, about a year from now. Tell me what you see in brief.
I mean, I expect the violence to continue to get a bit worse. We'll see whether it gets a lot worse. For that to happen, it would mean that the Sunni community largely didn't absorb the truths of their defeat in the Battle of Baghdad. I think they did. So I don't think you're going to have the place come asunder. Listen, I mean, I think it would be great if the Americans could leave Iraq completely. I think the Shia community will eventually demand that. I would agree with Larry. The timing of that is a different issue. But I would say that it's not something which is probably going to be as quick as many people believe. This will take time,
Yes.
and I'm not upset by that.
Larry, final question to you, almost the same question. Mr. Obama made it to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue because of his position vis-a-vis Iraq. Is there a stomach in the United States for this saga to continue for a long time?
No, I don't think so. I think President Obama had said he would set a withdrawal date. He said that during the campaign. His whole focus now, and the focus of our military, is on Afghanistan. Admiral Mullen said last week Afghanistan is the main priority. So I think you'll continue to see the drawdown, and Iraq's future is really in the hands of the Iraqis. Larry
Korb, Mark Gerecht, Sami Ramadani, gentlemen, thank you for being guests on Inside Iraq.
Pleasure.
To access the show and to send us your comments, please go to aljazeera.net/English. We have reached the end of this show. Join me next week when we take another look inside Iraq. Until then, have a great week.